in the presidential suite of a high-end private hospital, guarded like a fortress. The only sound was the steady beeping of the heart monitor. The air was thick, heavy, as if time itself had frozen. Malcolm Reynolds, 42, a black tech billionaire and one of the rare African-American CEOs on the Fortune 500 list, had been lying motionless for 18 days. A red scar slashed across his left temple, the only visible remnant of the private jet crash that the media had dubbed the trillion-dollar tragedy. But everyone was wrong. Malcolm had awakened on the third day after the crash. He opened his eyes and immediately shut them again, not out of weakness, but because he had one goal: to find out who had tried to kill him. He controlled his breathing, mastered every bodily response. Like a master of disguise, blending into the very stage of his life to observe. Because he knew a carefully orchestrated conspiracy was unfolding, and the enemy wasn't out there, but very close. "I think it's time we change strategies," said a voice outside the glass wall. Julia Reynolds, Malcolm's beautiful wife of 7 years, stood there, her eyes flicking toward the two-ways mirror, her voice calm but chilling. "The board's getting nervous. Investors are panicking. We can't keep waiting." "Patience, sis," came a deep male voice. "Victor, Malcolm's half-brother and current vice president of Reynolds Tech. Just one more week and the board will vote to activate the incapacity clause. Remember our deal with Dr. Laurent? The medical report's ready." Under the thick blankets, Malcolm's heart pounded. His instincts had been right. The crash was just the opening move. This was a chess game, and he'd been shoved off the board with his own flesh and blood. "And what about attorney Deanna Coleman?" Julia pressed, lips tight. "She's still asking to see the original test results." "Not for long," Victor replied, a glint of malice in his eyes. "I've arranged for her to face the Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Word is, some questionable documents just surfaced in her office." Malcolm clenched his jaw. Diana Coleman, the woman who had mentored him through law school, the most loyal partner in building his empire, was now a target too. The sliding door opened, soft as a breath. The footsteps that entered were unlike anyone else's, light, measured, deliberate. A female voice followed, clear, professional, devoid of the sugary tone common among nurses. "Good evening, Mr. Reynolds. I'm Maya, your new night nurse." Malcolm picked up the faint scent of lavender trailing behind her steps. She checked his vitals, adjusted the monitors. "Stable," she noted, jotting it down swiftly. Then, silence. The sound of the pen stopped. Malcolm felt the gentle weight of someone sitting beside him. And then, the unexpected happened. "I don't know if you can hear me," Maya said, her voice dropping low, nearly a confession. "But I have to say this. I shouldn't be here." Malcolm maintained his steady breathing, eyes shut tight. But his mind snapped to full alert. Another secret was about to unfold. This time, not from an enemy, but from someone who seemed outside the game. "I was hired 3 days ago to replace your former nurse," Maya continued softly. "She resigned suddenly, or at least that's what I was told." She paused, hesitation flickering across her face. Then her voice deepened, confessional. "But last night, while reviewing your medical files, I noticed something strange. The sedative levels being administered are far higher than the standard protocol for your type of neurological trauma, and the reflex reports, they don't add up." She leaned in closer, her whisper brushing the air. "I'm not just a nurse, Mr. Reynolds. I'm a forensic neurospecialist, And I can say with certainty, someone is deliberately keeping you unconscious. They don't want you to recover. Malcolm's heart clenched, not out of fear, but from the rage igniting like fire in his chest. No machine could detect it, but he knew. His heart had just flinched at the bitter truth beginning to reveal itself. I don't know who was behind it or why, Maya continued, but I swear, I will find out. I'll help you wake up, even if it costs me my job, or my own safety. She stood up, walked over to the IV system, and adjusted the dosage with quiet precision. I'll slowly lower the sedative levels. No one will notice. But in a few days, you will start showing responses. And when that happens, The door suddenly swung open. Maya stepped back, her expression shifting instantly, professional, calm, as if nothing had happened. Just checking vitals as requested, she said, flashing a polite smile. Thank you, nurse. A man's voice replied, cold, familiar. Dr. Leron. The door closed again. In that moment, Malcolm felt both anxiety and a spark of hope. In a world he had believed he faced alone, there was in fact an ally, unexpected and brave, quietly fighting the darkness with him. But what Maya didn't know, what no one in this hospital could possibly suspect, was that Malcolm had woken up long ago. Behind his closed eyes, a plan was already taking shape. A plan not just to survive, but to flip the board entirely. They thought he was a helpless pawn lying in wait for fate to decide. But right where he seemed weakest, Malcolm would unleash his most powerful counterattack. Because he hadn't become a billionaire by surrendering. He built his empire by seeing opportunity where others saw only barriers. And now, while his betrayers clawed for power over his presumed corpse, Malcolm was secretly rewriting the script. One with no room for forgiveness in the final act. If the story of betrayal, inner strength, and the unlikely alliance between a billionaire and a nurse resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because the most thrilling part hasn't even started. The plan began to take shape on the third night after his first encounter with Maya. As she adjusted his pillow, Malcolm took a risk. He moved his index finger twice. Maya froze. She stared at his hand. You're awake. Did you just move? She no longer had any doubts. Confusion gave way to determination. We need to set up a signal system, Malcolm whispered, glancing toward the door. 1 tap means yes, 2 means no. Blink once if you agree. He blinked. That night, as the hospital drifted into sleep, they quietly built a secret communication system. Maya brought in alphabet cards. Malcolm spelled out words. Slowly, with effort. But every letter was a piece of the counterattack. Every word was a bullet aimed at dismantling the deception. My plane was sabotaged, Malcolm spelled out that first night. Maya froze. Who would do that? Julia and Victor, he continued, my wife and my brother. The answer made the air in the room freeze. When? Maya asked, barely able to believe her ears. Malcolm paused for a beat, then continued. Project Aurora. Project Aurora, the most groundbreaking technological initiative Reynolds Tech had ever developed. A renewable energy system capable of reducing electricity costs by up to 70% for low-income communities. Something Malcolm had quietly overseen without involving the board. Only a small circle of trusted allies knew about it, and that secrecy had made him a target. During the day, Maya tracked everything. Victor showed up frequently, always accompanied by Dr. Leroux, reviewing medical files and asking seemingly caring but clearly strategic questions. Julia rarely entered the room, and when she did, her eyes roamed like she was inventorying valuables, mentally preparing a list of what to sell first if Malcolm truly died. One night, after confirming they weren't being watched, Maya leaned in and whispered to Malcolm, "I've got news from Diana Coleman. I made contact with one of her people. The ethics committee is applying pressure. They're accusing her of document tampering, bribery, and contract manipulation, all fabricated charges." Malcolm's eyes flickered with fury. Though he couldn't speak, the rage radiating from him was unmistakable. "Don't worry," Maya said with a reassuring smile. "I sent her an anonymous tip. Diana's sharp. She'll know it's a trap." Meanwhile, Victor continued to push the agenda. Maya secretly recorded a hallway conversation between him and Dr. Leroux. "The board votes next week," Victor said, eyes fixed on his luxury watch. "We need that final report confirming irreversible brain damage." "It's nearly done," Laurent replied, his voice low and tense. "But the night nurse, she's asking too many questions. She even checked the old files." Victor sighed, irritated. "She's just a nurse. If she causes trouble, fire her." What neither of them knew was that Malcolm not only heard everything, but was slowly regaining strength. Under Maya's quiet guidance, he began small physical exercises, flexing his fingers, wiggling his toes, inch by inch, in the dark, like a fighter preparing for a final strike. On the sixth night, Maya brought in someone unexpected. "There's someone I need you to meet," she whispered, closing the door softly. "I trust her completely." A stern-looking woman approached the bed, her sharp gaze reading Malcolm's every breath like a diagnosis. "I'm Dr. Chun, a forensic neurologist," she said curtly. "Maya reached out to me with her concerns about your condition." She turned to Maya. "Draw the curtains. Lock the door." For 30 minutes, Dr. Chun conducted a thorough exam, without using any electronic equipment that might trigger the hospital's systems. Just pure skill, experience, and eyes as sharp as a scalpel. At last she looked up and delivered her verdict. "Just as we suspected. There is no permanent neurological damage. This prolonged coma is the result of sustained high-dose sedative administration. This isn't treatment. It's a crime. Is being held in this state artificially," Dr. Chun concluded, her voice cold and precise. "But if we're going to turn the tables," Maya said, eyes lit with determination, "we need undeniable evidence for court. Something untouchable, something they can't dismiss as rumor." "I have an idea," Dr. Chun replied, opening her leather case. "But it's risky, and it'll require absolute cooperation from Mr. Reynolds." The next morning, Victor walked into the executive boardroom of Reynolds Tech wearing a triumphant smile, the look of a man who believed he had just claimed the throne. Before him sat 12 board members, men and women in flawless suits, prepared to vote on the temporary transfer of leadership. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor began, handing out documents, "according to the confirmed medical report, my brother is no longer capable of cognitive recovery. Dr. Laron recommends that we act swiftly to maintain the company's stability. Elizabeth Okafords, the board's only black member and a longtime friend of Malcolm," flipped through the pages, her eyes filled with suspicion. "Everything seems a little too convenient, Victor. Before the accident, Malcolm was in perfect health." "Tragedies tend to strike without warning, Elizabeth," Julia interjected, her voice as sweet as syrup. "Believe me, no one is more heartbroken than I am right now." Elizabeth glanced at Julia's hand. no wedding ring. A small detail, but one that couldn't be ignored. Her husband was supposedly on the verge of death, so where was the ring? We all admire what Malcolm built, Victor continued, his tone soft yet insistent. But now is the time to be practical. Our stock has dropped 12% since the crash. Investors need a stable leadership image. What Victor didn't know was that Elizabeth was secretly recording the entire meeting, with her phone tucked beneath her folder. The plan was underway, but not his. It was Malcolm's, as they assumed victory was just a vote away. Across the city, the man they declared lost was preparing to reappear in a way none of them could have imagined. Back in the hospital room, the results of a confidential test had just finished uploading. Mayer looked to Dr. Chun. Their eyes met in full agreement. The numbers on the monitor were undeniable. The man believed to be unconscious was fully aware. More than that, he was regaining physical control faster than any medical projection had predicted. "Ready to take the next step?" Maya asked as Dr. Chun closed her portable device. For the first time in weeks, Malcolm opened his eyes completely. A slow, sharp smile spread across his lips, like the edge of a blade. "More than ready," he replied, his voice raspy from illness, but filled with unwavering resolve. "They think they're going to steal my empire, but they have no idea what's coming." The man the world had forgotten under the label of deep coma was coming back, not just to reclaim what was his, but to expose a truth that would shake the very foundation of the empire his family believed they had secured through deceit and betrayal. A truth that even Maya, the most loyal companion, had yet to discover. In the Reynolds Tech boardroom, the atmosphere was as heavy as a courtroom awaiting a verdict. Victor wore a confident smile as he distributed printed copies of the medical report, skillfully doctored, complete with signatures and official seals. Beside him, Julia maintained a perfectly somber expression, occasionally dabbing the corners of her eyes with a silk handkerchief. No tears fell, but her gaze scanned the room, measuring every glance, every hesitation, like a salesperson sizing up a roomful of buyers. What they didn't know was that in just moments, the doors behind them would swing open, and the man they claimed had lost all capacity would walk in, as sharp and commanding as a king reclaiming his throne. "If there are no further questions," Victor declared, his voice arrogant with certainty, "we will now proceed to vote on the temporary transfer of executive authority, as recommended by Dr. Laurent." Hand went up. Elizabeth Okafor. "I have one last question," Elizabeth said, locking eyes with Victor. "Why isn't Dr. Laurent here to personally explain his medical conclusion?" Victor glanced quickly at Julia, a flicker of worry flashing in his eyes. "Unfortunately, he was called away for an emergency case. But the report is very clear." "As clear as his conscience, Victor," a deep voice cut in from the doorway, strong and final like a verdict. Every head turned almost in unison. Malcolm Reynolds stood tall at the entrance, immaculate in a navy blue suit, hand resting on a dark wooden cane. His stance was steady, his gaze razor-sharp, like a king returning to claim his throne in a court of traitors. Beside him stood Maya and Dr. Chun, both scanning the room filled with stunned expressions. Behind them came attorney Diana Coleman, carrying a black leather briefcase brimming with documents. Julia jolted, knocking over a glass of water. Victor froze, his face draining of color. "This can't be," Victor stammered, slowly rising, visibly shaken. "You were in the coma. Dr. Lauren, he confirmed it." "Dr. Laurent?" Malcolm interrupted, stepping into the center of the boardroom, his voice cold as steel. is currently under police investigation for falsifying medical records and conspiracy to commit medical malpractice with intent to harm. Dr. Chun stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the table. As an independent forensic neurologist, I confirm that Mr. Reynolds was kept under prolonged sedation without any medical necessity. His recovery was intentionally obstructed. Julia's voice rose, panic-stricken. "This is ridiculous. My husband was in a horrific accident. It was just that, an accident." "A perfectly timed accident, wasn't it?" Malcolm replied, never taking his eyes off her. "A fully maintained private jet, and yet a sudden hydraulic failure, coincidentally just as you were pressuring the board to restructure the company's equity." Diana opened her briefcase and distributed documents to the board members. "These are transcripts of conversations between Julia Reynolds and Victor Hayes in the weeks leading up to the crash," she stated clearly. "You'll notice the phrase permanent solution to the Aurora obstacle appears repeatedly." Aurora, the heart of Malcolm's vision, a renewable energy project aimed at slashing utility costs for underserved communities. A breakthrough with the potential to change the world and threaten the old powers clinging to the status quo. "Absurd," Victor tried to regain control. "We were referring to technical roadblocks, not Malcolm." For the first time, Malcolm smiled, a sharp, calculated smile. "Maya, please." Maya stepped forward and played a video clip on her tablet, clear audio of a hallway conversation. Victor's voice filled the room. "Keep him in the coma until after the board votes. Then, let nature take its course. A patient in a coma that long, anything could happen." The room fell deathly silent. All eyes turned to Victor, his face now flushed red with panic. This is doctored, you can't trust that?" "The nurse," Maya interjected calmly, "is a certified digital forensics analyst, internationally accredited. And we have more." Diana stepped forward again and placed another document on the table. Evidence of wire transfers from a foreign shell company controlled by Victor to Dr. Laron's private offshore account. No one spoke. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. "If there are no further questions," Victor had declared moments earlier, his tone smug and overconfident, "we will now proceed to vote on the temporary transfer of executive authority, as recommended by Dr. Laron." And hand risen, Elizabeth Okafors. "I have one last question," she had said, staring directly at Victor. "Why isn't Dr. Laron here to personally explain his medical conclusion?" Victor had glanced at Julia, worry flickering in his eyes. He was called to handle an emergency case. "But the report is very clear." "As clear as his conscience, Victor," a deep voice had echoed from the doorway, powerful as judgment. And that was when they all turned to see Malcolm Reynolds standing tall, like a ruler reclaiming his crown amid a palace of betrayal. Beside him stood Maya and Dr. Chun, both scanning the room, reading every stunned expression. Following closely behind was attorney Diana Coleman, carrying a black leather briefcase brimming with files. Julia jolted, knocking over her glass. Victor stood frozen, his face drained of color. This can't be," Victor stammered, slowly rising to his feet, visibly unsteady. "You were still in a deep coma. Dr. Laron, he confirmed it." "Dr. Laron," Malcolm cut in, stepping into the center of the boardroom, his voice cold as ice, "is currently under police investigation for falsifying medical records and conspiring to commit medical malpractice with intent to harm." Dr. Chun moved forward and placed a thick dossier on the table. As an independent forensic neurologist, I confirmed that Mr. Reynolds was kept in a prolonged sedative state, entirely unnecessary from a medical standpoint. His recovery was deliberately obstructed. Julia panicked. This is absurd. My husband suffered a horrific accident. An accident? That came at the most convenient time, right? Malcolm said, eyes locked on Julia. A perfectly maintained private jet suddenly experiences catastrophic hydraulic failure. Coincidentally, just as you were pushing the board to reconsider the company's equity structure, Diana opened her briefcase and handed documents to each board member. These are detailed transcripts of conversations between Julia Reynolds and Victor Hayes in the weeks leading up to the crash, she stated clearly. You'll notice the phrase permanent solution to the Aurora obstacle appears multiple times. Aurora, the heartbeat of Malcolm's vision, a low-cost, renewable energy initiative aimed at underserved communities. A breakthrough with the power to change the world and to dismantle the entrenched interests clinging to the old system. Ridiculous! Victor tried to regain control. We were referring to technical barriers within the project, not Malcolm himself. For the first time, Malcolm smiled, cold and calculated. Maya, if you would. Maya stepped forward and played a video clip from her tablet. The hallway conversation rang out loud and clear. Victor's voice echoed, "Keep him in the coma until the board votes. After that, let nature take its course. A coma patient that long, anything can happen." The room fell completely silent. All eyes turned to Victor, now visibly red-faced and rattled. This is fabricated. You can't trust this. The nurse you're referring to, Maya interjected, calm and composed, is an internationally certified digital evidence analyst. And we have more. Diana stepped forward again and laid another document on the table. Proof of financial transfers from a foreign company controlled by Victor to a private offshore account belonging to Dr. Laurent. No one spoke. The entire room felt as if the air had been sucked out. Starting 3 days before the crash, Elizabeth Okafor suddenly stood, her eyes blazing with fury. This is a crime. Attempted murder, corporate fraud, and betrayal of family. Absolutely unacceptable. Malcolm stepped toward Victor, who was now backing up toward the wall like a cornered animal. You know what surprises me most, Victor? Malcolm's voice was low but sharp as steel. It's that you and Julia actually believed you could take me down that easily. Me, the man who built this company from nothing, who faced discrimination in every boardroom, every funding round, every rescinded invitation, simply because of the color of my skin. And you thought I would just give up? Julia, watching everything crumble, made one last desperate attempt. Malcolm. Sweetheart, you're confused from the meds. Everything we did was to protect you. Spare me, Malcolm cut her off coldly. Did you leave your wedding ring in your purse? Or sell it already? 1 week after my crash, you were planning to redecorate the estate. Only a killer stays that calm. By then, corporate security had quietly entered the room. Mr. Reynolds, the head of security said, the police are downstairs. Shall we escort Mr. Hayes and Mrs. Reynolds out? Please. Malcolm nodded. Victor panicked as 2 officers moved toward him. You don't understand, he shouted. Aurora will destroy our biggest contracts. Investors will flee. You're throwing away decades of work for a charity project. This isn't charity, Malcolm replied, calm as ever as Victor was taken away. It's the future. And as for the investors, they've already approved it. The vote happened last night while you were busy plotting my death. As the room was left with only the stunned board members, Malcolm exhaled, and sat in the chair Victor had occupied just minutes earlier. For a moment, fatigue washed over his face, not just from physical exhaustion, but from the weight of invisible wounds. "I thought I'd lost you," Elizabeth whispered, gently squeezing his shoulder. "Maybe I really was lost," Malcolm replied, eyes drifting toward Maya, who was deep in conversation with Diana. "If not for someone who dared to stand against injustice, even when silence would have been safer." But what no one else in that room knew was that the plot against Malcolm was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the betrayal of family lay a far more powerful force, one with the reach not just to silence a man, but to stop a vision called Aurora. 6 months later, the headquarters of Reynolds Tech had transformed, not just in appearance, with Aurora solar panels now glittering across its rooftop, but in purpose. From his redesigned office, Malcolm looked out over the city through a wall of glass. The morning sunlight bathed the skyline, a quiet symbol of a new beginning. The newspaper on his desk bore the bold headline, "Victor Hayes and Julia Reynolds sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and corporate fraud." The case was closed. But one question still lingered in Malcolm's mind as he watched Maya, the woman who had altered the course of his life, chatting with Diana. Where does the loyalty of a woman who risked everything to save a stranger lead? The answer, Malcolm would soon discover. And when he did, it wouldn't just reshape his empire. It would redefine trust, power, and the true meaning of family. Victor Hayes, sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder and corporate fraud. Julia, Malcolm's former wife, received 8 years after a plea agreement. Dr. Laurent lost his medical license and awaited trial for gross ethical misconduct. "You'll want to see this," Maya said, entering with a tablet in hand. On the screen, images played. Children at an underfunded public school cheering as they flipped on a light switch. Soft, clean light from the Aurora system flooded the classroom. Teachers' voices trembled with emotion. The pilot project had been a stunning success, electricity bills reduced by 78%. Malcolm smiled. "What about the investors?" he asked, still slightly skeptical. "Worried," Maya replied, then gave a soft smile. "Sure, but stock prices have jumped 42% since the nationwide rollout was announced." "Seems doing the right thing can be profitable too," Malcolm mused. Elizabeth Okafor entered, followed by Diana Coleman, now officially Reynolds Tech's chief legal officer. Elizabeth placed a thick folder on the table. "The foundation is official," she announced. "The Reynolds Ellis Foundation for Medical Ethics." Malcolm glanced at Maya. She looked momentarily stunned upon hearing her name linked to his. "You saved my life," Malcolm said without embellishment. "Your name belongs on it." "I still can't believe you did that," Maya replied, moved. "Donating 30% of Aurora's profits to reform medical ethics." "And every participating hospital," Diana added, "will be required to install password-protected cameras in recovery rooms, implement dual-layer medication checks, and maintain continuous oversight by independent inspectors." "Oh, by the way," Elizabeth interjected, half joking, "guess who called me today?" Malcolm looked up. "Victor, from prison." He raised an eyebrow. "And? What does our convicted schemer want?" "Negotiation," Elizabeth said, lips tightening. "He claims to have information about other executives who were also involved in sabotaging the Aurora project. Looks like he and Julia weren't acting alone. Some major names in traditional energy," Diana added. Malcolm didn't look surprised. I always knew Victor wasn't smart enough to come up with all of it on his own. Want me to arrange a meeting? Diana asked. No, Malcolm replied, turning back toward the window. Let him stay there. The truth always finds its way to the light when the time is right. Later that day, Malcolm and Maya walked through the hallway of the company's new research center. Inside the sleek labs, dozens of young scientists from all walks of life worked with focus, testing improved versions of the Aurora system. You know what impresses me most? Maya said, watching a group of researchers deep in debate. It's not the tech, it's the culture shift. Half the people here would never have had a shot at joining a traditional tech company, she added quietly. But now, they're building the future. Malcolm nodded. When you've lain helpless in a hospital bed, you learn who truly cares and who's just pretending. Experience taught me something vital. You don't judge people by degrees or paychecks, but by character. Aya smiled. And Malcolm knew Aurora's light wasn't just illuminating rooftops, it was ushering in a new era. You could have just taken back the company and gone back to life as it was, Maya said, her gaze deep. Why change everything? Malcolm stopped walking. He turned to look at her, his expression serious but not heavy. Because I discovered something in that hospital room. Power without purpose is just an empty shell. Victor and Julia had everything. Money, status, influence. But they still wanted more. So much more that they were willing to kill to get it. And me? He paused. I built a tech empire. I broke through barriers in a corporate world riddled with bias against people of color. But for what? It took nearly dying for me to realize true success isn't about what you take, it's about what you leave behind. On the way back to his office, they stopped before a newly designed space in the main lobby. Etched into a large glass panel was a quote. True power isn't in the control we hold, but in how we respond when that control is threatened. In our most vulnerable moments, we see the truest version of ourselves. Maya smiled, recognizing the words, something she had once said to Malcolm during a long night in the hospital, surrounded by cold machines and fragile hope. Who would have thought, she whispered. A temporary nurse and a billionaire who was supposed to be comatose could change so many lives. Malcolm gently took her hand. Not flashy, not rushed, just a gesture full of respect and connection. We're not done, he said softly. We're just getting started. That night, while Victor sat motionless in his cold prison cell, staring blankly at a gray wall with no answers, and Julia struggled to adapt to life in a federal facility elsewhere, Malcolm and Maya were finalizing the largest expansion in the history of Project Aurora. 3 continents, millions of impoverished households, soon to have light, clean water, and a new beginning. The plot to destroy Malcolm Reynolds hadn't just failed. It had become the spark for a transformation no one dared imagine. Brought to the edge of death, Malcolm was reborn, not by medicine, but by purpose. And by one simple truth, sometimes we must lose everything to discover what truly matters. This story reminds us, the greatest strength doesn't lie in the power we hold, but in the integrity we preserve when we hold it. That behind the greatest injustices, the most miraculous transformations can bloom, if we're brave enough to turn pain into purpose. If this story of betrayal, resilience, and rebirth has touched your heart, be sure to subscribe, because the darkest moments in life might just be the beginning of the greatest impact you'll ever make.